Chapter 1. The Invitation to Elmwood Manor. The envelope lay on the silver salver like a white dove among the Morning Post, its heavy cream stock embossed with a crest that spoke of centuries of breeding and quiet arrogance. Hercule Poirot, seated at his breakfast table in the precise centre of his London flat, regarded it with the same meticulous attention he gave to a misplaced crumb. The wax seal, scarlet, imprinted with an entwined E and A, had been broken with a knife rather than a thumb, a detail that pleased his sense of order. "Mon ami," he murmured to Captain Hastings, who was attacking a plate of kippers with the enthusiasm of a man who believed food improved with violence. "Observe the quality of this paper. It is not merely expensive, it is insistent. One does not refuse such an invitation without consequence." Hastings, mouth full, managed a muffled, another weekend in the country. You'll hate the beds, Poirot. Always too soft or too damp." Poirot's moustaches twitched in disapproval. "The beds, Hastings, are irrelevant. It is the minds that interest me. Lady Eleanor Ashford does not invite the greatest detective in Europe," he permitted himself a small, satisfied smile, "merely to sample her chef's soufflé aux épinards." The card inside was handwritten in a flowing copperplate that suggested both education and impatience. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, Elmwood Manor has stood for 300 years, yet I fear it may not survive another fortnight without your singular talents. A matter of the utmost delicacy requires a man who sees what others merely look at. Dine with us on the 14th. The train from Paddington arrives at 4:17. My motor will meet you. Come, if not for my sake, then for the sake of a secret that threatens to devour us all. Eleanor Ashford." Hastings swallowed. "Sounds dashed ominous. Secret, devour. She's not asking you to carve the roast, that's certain." Poirot folded the card with geometrical precision. "Lady Ashford is a woman who has buried 2 husbands and 1 fortune, yet still commands the ton. When such a woman speaks of secrets, Hastings, she does not mean the colour of her new hat." He rose, smoothing invisible wrinkles from his faultless morning coat. "We depart tomorrow. Pack the grey suit, the one with the subtle check, and the ebony cane with the silver band. One must be prepared for both the drawing-room and the dungeon." Elmwood Manor crouched at the end of a gravel drive, lined with yews so ancient they seemed to lean inward, whispering. The house itself was a mongrel of architectural passions, Tudor beams grafted onto Georgian symmetry, Victorian turrets sprouting like mushrooms after rain. Poirot, stepping from the Rolls-Royce that had collected them at the station, noted the fresh paint on the window frames and the faint smell of wet stone. Money was being spent, but not earned. Lady Eleanor awaited them in the entrance hall, a tall woman in her 55th year who had refused to yield to either time or fashion. Her gown was black silk, severe as a judge's robe, but the triple strand of pearls at her throat could have ransomed a small principality. Her eyes, grey, cold, and very direct, fixed on Poirot with the relief of a chess player who has finally found a worthy opponent. "Monsieur Poirot." Her voice was low, cultivated, with the faintest trace of Yorkshire beneath the Mayfair polish. "You are punctual. I detest unpunctuality. It is the first symptom of a disordered mind." Poirot bowed over her hand with exquisite correctness. "And you, Lady Ashford, are a woman who values order above all things. Yet you summon me, who am the enemy of disorder, to a house where, I suspect, chaos is already unpacking its bags." A flicker of something, amusement, fear, crossed her face. Perceptive as ever. "Come, the others are gathering. I would have you see them before the masks are fully in place." She led them through corridors where ancestors glared from gilded frames, their painted eyes following the little detective with the suspicion reserved for foreigners and tax collectors. The drawing-room doors stood open, revealing a fire that roared with more enthusiasm than warmth. Around it, the guests arranged themselves like pieces on a board, whose rules only Lady Ashford understood. Sir Reginald Blackwell dominated the hearth, a bull of a man with a face the colour of rare steak and a voice that could shatter crystal. He was pouring whisky with the generosity of a man who owned the distillery, and Poirot recalled 3 others besides. His laugh boomed across the room, but his eyes, small and pale, darted continually to the door. "Lady Ashford's little Belgian," he bellowed, raising his glass. "Come to keep us honest, eh? Though between you and me, old boy, honesty is a commodity in short supply at Elmwood." Poirot's smile was a masterpiece of urbanity. "Sir Reginald, I am told you deal in commodities. Perhaps you can advise me on the current price of truth." Before Blackwell could retort, a young woman detached herself from the window embrasure. Miss Diana Ashford, Lady Eleanor's niece by marriage, if Poirot's memory served, was all nervous energy wrapped in emerald silk. Her beauty was the kind that made men forget their lines. But her hands twisted the stem of her cocktail glass as if it were a neck. "You must be Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice pitched too high. "Aunt Eleanor says you can read minds. Can you tell what I'm thinking now?" "That you would prefer to be anywhere but here," Poirot replied gently, "and that you have recently received a letter you did not wish to open." Her gasp was almost theatrical. Lady Eleanor's lips thinned, but she said nothing. From the shadows near the piano, a man watched with the stillness of a cat. Captain Marcus Vale, late of His Majesty's Navy, had the kind of face that suggested both discipline and damage. A scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, pale against tanned skin. He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Careful, Miss Ashford," he drawled. "The little man's dangerous, sees through bulkheads and bilge water alike." Poirot inclined his head. "And you, Captain, have the look of a man who has seen too much bilge water and not enough truth." A soft laugh came from the sofa, where Mrs. Lydia Crane arranged her ample form like a duchess holding court. She was Sir Reginald's sister, widowed twice, and rumoured to have driven both husbands to their graves with the sheer force of her personality. Her gown was plum velvet, her diamonds real, and her smile sharp enough to shave with. "Oh, do stop bristling, Marcus," she said. "Monsieur Poirot is here to entertain us, aren't you, little man? A parlour game with higher stakes." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Madame, I never play games. I solve puzzles, and this house, I think, is already providing pieces." The final guest entered then, slipping through the door like a secret. Miss Felicity Grey was Lady Eleanor's secretary, a pale, plain woman in her 30s, whose efficiency was legendary and whose presence was usually forgotten 5 minutes after she left a room. Tonight, however, she carried a leather folder clutched to her chest, as if it contained the crown jewels. "Forgive me," she murmured, eyes lowered. "The post has just arrived. There is something that requires Lady Ashford's attention." Lady Eleanor's composure flickered for the first time. "Later, Felicity, our guests, my lady." Miss Grey's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. "It cannot wait." Sir Reginald's glass paused halfway to his lips. Captain Vale's scar seemed to whiten. Even Mrs. Crane's diamonds ceased their restless flashing as she turned to stare. Poirot, alone among them, appeared merely curious. He noted the tremor in Miss Grey's hands, the way Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened on her pearls. the sudden silence that had nothing to do with politeness. "Ah," he said softly, almost to himself, "the game, it begins." Dinner was announced then, the gong reverberating through the house like a funeral bell. As the party moved toward the dining room, Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the room one final time. The fire had settled into sullen embers. On the mantel, a clock ticked with mechanical precision, and beneath the scent of beeswax and hothouse flowers, he detected something else, something metallic like blood or fear. Lady Eleanor paused beside him. "You see too much, Monsieur Poirot." "On the contrary, Lady Ashford," he replied, "I have only just begun to look." The dining-room doors stood open, revealing a table set for 8 with crystal that caught the candlelight and threw it back in shards of ice. At its centre, a silver epergne overflowed with orchids the idiot, colour of bruises. The places were marked with cards in the same copperplate hand that had written Poirot's invitation. He found his name between Miss Diana Ashford and Mrs. Crane, a position, he reflected, that promised both nervous flutterings and poisonous barbs. As he took his seat, he noted that Sir Reginald's place was directly opposite, with Captain Vale to his right and Miss Grey to his left. Lady Eleanor presided at the head, her back to the windows where darkness pressed against the glass like a living thing. The first course was served, consommé madrilène, clear as topaz, and fragrant with sherry. Poirot sipped, his mind cataloguing the tremor in Diana's wrist as she lifted her spoon, the way Blackwell's eyes tracked every movement of the footman, the faint bruise on Miss Grey's wrist where her sleeve had ridden up. Conversation flowed in careful eddies. The weather, unseasonably cold. The state of the roads, execrable. The new play at the Haymarket, shocking, darling, simply shocking. Beneath it all, the tension coiled tighter, a spring wound by invisible hands. It was Blackwell who broke first. "Eleanor," he said abruptly, setting down his spoon with a clatter that made Diana jump. "This nonsense about your will! Time to put a stop to it. Family's family, but business is business." Lady Eleanor's smile did not reach her eyes. "My will, Reginald, is my affair. As yours, I believe, remains a subject of some speculation in the city." Captain Vale leaned forward, his voice lazy, but his eyes sharp. "Speaking of speculation, old boy, heard you lost rather a packet on that Argentine railway scheme. Careless, that." Blackwell's face darkened to the colour of port wine. "Mind your tongue, Vale. Some of us earned our money honestly." "Honestly?" Mrs. Crane's laugh was a bark. "Reggie, you wouldn't know honesty if it bit you on your considerable enough." Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the rising storm like a whip. "We are not savages, not yet." The footman removed the soup plates with the silent efficiency of well-trained ghosts. The fish course arrived, sole in a delicate vermouth sauce, but Poirot barely tasted it. His attention was on the wine-glasses, each filled to precisely the same level, with a pale gold sauterne. He watched as Blackwell raised his glass, sniffed, sipped, watched as Diana's hand hovered, then withdrew, watched Miss Grey stare at her plate as if it might bite her. The clock in the hall struck 8. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. Poirot set down his fork. "Lady Ashford," he said quietly, "you spoke of a secret that threatens to devour you all. Perhaps it is time to introduce it to the company." For a moment, no one moved. Then Blackwell laughed, a sound with no humour in it. "Secret? The only secret here is how Eleanor keeps this mausoleum from crumbling around her ears." But his eyes, when they met Poirot's, held something else. Fear and calculation. Lady Eleanor rose, her chair scraping back with a sound like a scream. "Monsieur Poirot is right. There is a matter, but not here, not now." Her gaze swept the table, lingering on each face. "After dinner, in the library, all of you." She did not wait for assent. Turning, she swept from the room, her black silk rustling like dry leaves. The others followed, one by one, until only Poirot remained. He lingered over his wine, watching the candle flames tremble in a draught that had not been there before. From the corridor came the sound of raised voices. Blackwell's bluster, Vale's cool sarcasm, Diana's near hysterical protest. Poirot listened, his head tilted like a bird's. Then, with the delicacy of a surgeon, he reached for Sir Reginald's abandoned glass. A faint residue clung to the rim, crystalline, almost invisible. He brought it to his nose. Almonds, bitter, unmistakable. Poirot's moustaches bristled with satisfaction. "Ah," he whispered to the empty room, "the first piece of the puzzle, and already it is poisoned." Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows like bones in a box. Somewhere in Elmwood Manor, a clock began to chime the quarter hour, and Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian with the egg-shaped head and the eyes that saw everything, smiled into the darkness. The game, as he had said, had begun. Chapter 2. Assembling the Suspects. The library at Elmwood Manor smelled of old leather, older grudges, and the ghost of 1,000 cigars. Hercule Poirot entered it with the measured tread of a man walking onto a stage where every seat was already occupied by suspicion. The room was lit by a single chandelier, its crystals trembling in a draught that seemed to originate from the very walls. Books rose in serried ranks to a ceiling painted with faded gods and goddesses, who looked down with the weary indifference of those who had seen too many human follies. Lady Eleanor stood before the fireplace, her silhouette sharp against the flames. She had removed her pearls. In their place, a single diamond brooch glittered like a drop of frozen blood. The others arranged themselves with the awkward precision of people who knew they were being watched. "Close the door, Jarvis," she said to the butler, who hovered like a black crow in the shadows. The heavy oak swung shut with a thud that echoed like a judge's gavel. Poirot took the chair nearest the fire, arranging his handkerchief in his breast pocket with the care of a priest preparing the altar. His eyes, bright as a bird's, moved from face to face, cataloguing the small betrayals of posture and expression. Sir Reginald Blackwell had taken the largest armchair, his bulk overflowing its carved arms. His face was still flushed from the dining room, but now the colour seemed less like wine and more like rage barely contained. He drummed his fingers on the armrest, a rhythm that suggested calculations being made in some dark ledger. Captain Marcus Vale leaned against a globe, one boot crossed over the other, spinning it idly with a finger. The scar on his face caught the firelight, turning it into a livid slash. His eyes, however, were steady, watching Blackwell with the detached interest of a man who had seen worse storms at sea. Miss Diana Ashford had curled herself into a corner of the sofa, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled paint. She clutched a small lace handkerchief, shredding it thread by thread. Every few seconds her gaze darted to the door, as if expecting rescue or catastrophe. Mrs. Lydia Crane occupied the opposite end of the sofa, her plum velvet gown spread like a peacock's tail. She had produced a cigarette in a long ebony holder and was smoking with the deliberate enjoyment of someone who knew the habit annoyed half the room. Her eyes, sharp as gimlets, rested on Poirot with something approaching approval. Miss Felicity Grey stood apart, near the window, the leather folder still clutched to her chest. Her plain face was composed, but Poirot noted the pulse beating in her throat, rapid as a trapped bird's. Lady Eleanor waited until the silence had stretched to the breaking point. Then she spoke, her voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room. 3 days ago, I received this. She held up a single sheet of paper, heavy cream stock, the same as Poirot's invitation. It was delivered by hand, no postmark, no signature, only these words. She read aloud, each syllable falling like a stone into still water. The sins of the fathers are visited upon the children. By the next new moon, Elmwood will drink blood. One of you will pay the price, the rest will watch. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Blackwell was the first to break it. "Poppycock!" he exploded, surging to his feet. "Some crank with too much time and not enough sense. You should have burned it, Eleanor." "Should I?" Lady Eleanor's tone could have frozen champagne. "When the same handwriting appears on a note found in my late husband's safe. A note that speaks of debts. Debts that certain parties in this room would prefer remained buried." Captain Vale's globe stopped spinning. "Careful, Eleanor. Some debts are paid in full the moment they're mentioned." Diana gave a small, strangled sound. "Aunt, please, this is madness. We're not children to be frightened by ghost stories." "Are we not?" Mrs. Crane exhaled a perfect smoke ring. "Then explain the charming little gift that arrived with my morning post. A photograph. My first husband, dead these 20 years, with a red circle drawn around his throat. And on the back, the same words, 'Elmwood will drink blood.'" Miss Grey's knuckles whitened on the folder. "There's more," she said so quietly that everyone leaned forward to hear. "The household accounts. Someone has been altering them, small amounts at first, then larger, enough to ruin us within a year." Blackwell rounded on her. "You little snake, accusing me! I've poured more into this sinking ship than you can afford to lose," Vale interrupted smoothly. "We all know about the Argentine Railway, Reggie, and the rubber plantation in Malaya, and the charming Mrs. van der Merwe in Cape Town, who relieved you of £50,000 and your dignity." Blackwell's face went from red to purple. For a moment, Poirot thought he might strike the captain. Instead, he sank back into his chair, breathing like a bellows. Lady Eleanor raised a hand. "Enough! I did not bring you here to brawl like schoolboys. I brought you because—" She hesitated, the first crack in her composure. "Because I believe one of us will die before the week is out, and I would know why." Poirot had listened without moving, his small hands folded in his lap. Now he spoke, his voice soft but carrying the authority of a man who had solved 100 such puzzles. "Lady Ashford, you have assembled here a most interesting collection. Let us examine the pieces, yes? Sir Reginald, who builds empires and loses them with equal flair. Captain Vale, who has navigated treacherous waters and perhaps treacherous hearts. Miss Ashford, whose inheritance hangs by a thread that someone seems eager to cut. Mrs. Crane, whose husbands have a habit of dying at inconvenient moments. Miss Grey, who knows where all the skeletons are buried, perhaps because she helped dig the graves." Each name landed like a dart. Diana flinched. Vale's scar twitched. Crane's cigarette paused halfway to her lips. "And you, Lady Ashford," Poirot continued, "who have buried 2 husbands and 1 fortune, yet still command this crumbling kingdom. You say one of us will die. But tell me, why do you believe the threat is real?" Lady Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Because of this." She opened a small drawer in the table beside her and withdrew a velvet pouch. From it, she shook a single object into her palm. A small glass vial, no longer than Poirot's thumb, filled with colourless liquid. A label, handwritten in the same copperplate, bore a single word, nightshade. The room seemed to contract around that tiny bottle. "Where did you find it?" Vale asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "In the lining of my travelling case," Lady Eleanor replied. "Sewn into the seam. Someone put it there after I unpacked this afternoon." Blackwell stared at the vial as if it were a live scorpion. "That proves nothing. Could be a prank. Could it?" Poirot rose and crossed to Lady Eleanor, taking the vial with delicate fingers. He held it to the light, swirling the liquid gently. Atropine, perhaps, or something more exotic. The hand that prepared this knew its business. He sniffed the cork, then recorked it with care. "And the hand that wrote the label is the same that penned your invitation, Lady Ashford, and mine." Diana's voice was a threat. "You mean one of us?" "One of you," Poirot corrected gently, "or someone with access to this house. But let us be systematic. Jarvis!" The butler, who had been standing motionless by the door, startled. "Sir? You have served this family for how long?" 32 years, sir. Since Lady Ashford, her ladyship's mother, that is, was in the nursery." "And in those 32 years, have you ever seen this handwriting before?" Jarvis hesitated, his Adam's apple working. "I couldn't say, sir. Many letters come and go." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "But you could say if you had seen it recently. On a package, perhaps, or a note left on a tray." The butler's gaze slid away. "There was something, yesterday. A small parcel for Miss Grey, no return address. I left it in the secretary's room." Miss Grey went very still. "I never received any parcel." The silence was suddenly electric. Lady Eleanor's voice cut through it. "Felicity? I swear it," Miss Grey whispered. "I was in the village all afternoon. When I returned, my desk was disturbed, papers moved, but no parcel." Poirot's moustaches bristled with satisfaction. "Then we have our first mystery within a mystery. A parcel that arrives but vanishes. A poison that appears where it should not. And a threat that names no names but points to every heart in this room." He turned to the company, his small figure suddenly commanding. "Let us establish the facts. Sir Reginald, you arrived when?" "Yesterday noon," Blackwell growled. "Train from London. Jarvis met me. Captain Vale. Same train, different compartment." Vale's smile was thin. "Reggie snores. Miss Ashford?" Diana's voice trembled. "This morning, the 9:15 from Paddington. Aunt Eleanor sent the car. Mrs. Crane? Last night. Drove myself. My Bentley's in the stable yard if you want to count the mileage." "Miss Grey? I've been here since Monday, cataloguing the library for the insurance people." Poirot nodded, filing each answer away. "And the staff, besides Jarvis?" "Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper," Lady Eleanor supplied. "Cook, 3 maids, 2 footmen, the gardener and his boy. All local, all known to me since childhood." "Known," Poirot murmured, "is not the same as trusted, but we will come to that." He moved to the window, drawing back the heavy curtain. Outside the night pressed close, the moon a thin blade above the yews. "Tell me, Lady Ashford, when is the next new moon?" 3 days, she said quietly. "The 17th. Then we have 72 hours to prevent a murder, or to ensure that justice is done if we fail." He let the curtain fall. "But first, we must understand the board on which we play. Sir Reginald, your quarrel with Lady Ashford's late husband, what was its nature?" Blackwell's jaw worked. "Ancient history. A mining venture in Rhodesia. He thought I cheated him. I thought he was a fool. We both lost money. Enough to ruin you. Enough to sting. But I've been stung before. Captain Vale, you served with Lady Ashford's brother, yes? In the war?" Vale's eyes hooded. Poor devil didn't make it back from Gallipoli. Eleanor blames the brass. I was only a lieutenant. Yet you have dined at her table these 10 years past. Loyalty, or something more practical. Vale's scar twitched again. Ask your questions plainly, Poirot. I always do. Miss Ashford, your father, he was the younger son? Diana nodded. He died when I was 5. Motor accident. Aunt Eleanor raised me. And your expectations? I'm to inherit the London house. When Aunt... She stopped, horrified. When I die, Lady Eleanor finished dryly. No need to mince words, child. The will is clear. The manor to charity, the London house, and the residue to Diana, provided she marries with my approval. Diana's face flamed. I don't need your approval, or your money. Don't you? Mrs. Crane's voice was silk over steel. That charming young man in Tangier, Italian count, wasn't it? Needed rather a lot of bailing out, I hear. Diana leapt to her feet. You poisonous old... Enough! Lady Eleanor's command cracked like a whip. Diana sank back, tears glittering. Poirot watched it all, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Crane, your own fortunes, how do they stand? Comfortable, she said complacently. My husbands were generous in life, and more so in death. Though Reggie's been borrowing against his expectations. Naughty boy! Blackwell surged up again. I said I'd pay you back. With what? Vale drawled. Your good looks. The room threatened to explode into chaos. Poirot raised a hand, small but imperative. Mesdames et messieurs, you reveal much when you lose your tempers. But temper is not evidence, yet. He turned to Miss Grey, who had not moved since the mention of the missing parcel. Mademoiselle, you are very quiet. Yet you hold the keys to this house, yes? The accounts, the correspondence, the secrets. Miss Grey's voice was steady, but her eyes were haunted. I hold what Lady Ashford entrusts to me. And what has she entrusted lately, besides the cataloguing of books? A pause, then so softly that Poirot had to lean forward. A letter to her solicitor, changing the will. The effect was immediate. Diana gasped. Blackwell froze. Vale's globe began to spin again, faster this time. Lady Eleanor's face was marble. Felicity, I'm sorry, my lady, but if we're to find the truth, Poirot interrupted gently, is rarely found by spilling all the beans at once. But let us note this, a will in flux, a poison in a travelling case, a parcel that vanishes, and a threat that promises blood by the new moon. The pieces, they begin to form a picture. He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. For tonight, I suggest locked doors and watchful eyes. Tomorrow, we will search this house from attic to cellar, and we will speak to the staff, all of them. As the others filed out, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, Poirot lingered. He opened the velvet pouch again, studying the vial. Then, with a sudden movement, he slipped it into his pocket. In the corridor, a shadow detached itself from the wall. Jarvis, his face impassive. Will there be anything else, sir? Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Yes, mon ami. There will be a great deal else. Beginning with where you were between 3 and 4 o'clock this afternoon. The butler's eyes flickered. In the pantry, sir, polishing the silver. Alone? Quite alone. Poirot nodded. Then the silver will bear witness to your industry or your absence. He passed on, his footsteps light on the ancient floorboards. Behind him, the library door closed with the soft finality of a crypt. Upstairs, in the guest wing, doors were locking, keys turning with frantic clicks. In the servants' hall, whispers rose and fell like smoke. And somewhere in the heart of Elmwood Manor, a clock struck 11, each chime a reminder that time was running out. Poirot paused outside his door, listening. From Diana's room came the sound of muffled sobbing. From Blackwell's, the clink of a decanter against glass. Vale's room was silent, but a thin line of light showed beneath the door. The little detective smiled grimly. 72 hours, he murmured, and already the rats are measuring the distance to the cheese. He entered his room, locking the door behind him. From his pocket he drew the vial, holding it to the lamp. The liquid caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across the ceiling. "Nightshade," he whispered, "or something cleverer, but either way, mon petit, you have a story to tell." Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows like bones in a box. And in the darkness beyond the manor walls, something moved among the yews. Something that watched and waited and knew that the new moon was only 3 nights away. Chapter 3. The Toast of Deception. The dining room at Elmwood Manor had been transformed since the previous night's tense withdrawal. The long mahogany table, scarred by generations of careless knives and spilled claret, now gleamed under the chandelier's electric blaze. Lady Ashford had modernized in 1924, and the bulbs hummed like captive bees. 8 places were set with the precision of a military parade. Sèvres porcelain, Georgian silver, crystal so thin it seemed to breathe. At the centre stood the epergne, its silver arms laden with hothouse grapes and orchids whose bruised petals had begun to brown at the edges. Hercule Poirot entered at precisely 8 o'clock, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the Aubusson carpet. He paused on the threshold, nostrils flaring. Beneath the expected scents, beeswax, wood smoke, the faint sweetness of overripe fruit, lay something sharper. Metallic, familiar, almonds again, he thought, but fainter, diffused, as if the poison itself were teasing him. Lady Eleanor was already seated at the head, her black silk replaced by dove-grey velvet that made her look carved from moonlight. She did not rise, but her eyes followed Poirot with the wariness of a duchess greeting a tax inspector. "You are punctual, Monsieur Poirot, a virtue in short supply among my guests." Order, Lady Ashford, is the foundation of civilization. Without it, we are merely animals with better table manners. He took his place between Diana Ashford and Mrs. Crane. Diana's eyes were red-rimmed, her emerald gown exchanged for severe navy that did nothing for her complexion. Mrs. Crane, by contrast, had chosen scarlet chiffon that clashed gloriously with the decor and her diamonds. She was already attacking the deviled eggs with the enthusiasm of a woman who believed starvation was a character flaw. Sir Reginald Blackwell arrived next, his dinner jacket straining at the shoulders. He carried the faint odour of whisky and the heavier burden of a sleepless night. His gaze swept the table, lingering on the decanters lined up like soldiers before the battle. "Morning all," he boomed, though it was evening. "Let's eat, drink, and be merry, eh? For tomorrow we may be poisoned." He laughed, but the sound cracked in the middle. Captain Vale followed, immaculate in white tie, the scar on his face livid against his tan. He moved with the economy of a man who had learned to conserve energy in submarines and drawing rooms alike. Miss Grey brought up the rear, her plain brown gown making her look like a governess accidentally invited to the ball. She carried no folder tonight. Her hands were empty, the knuckles white. The first course arrived, consommé again, but this time enriched with Madeira and garnished with paper-thin slices of truffle. Poirot watched the footman serve with the concentration of a general observing troop movements. The younger footman, Thomas, barely 20, with a cowlick that refused discipline, poured the wine. A 1918 Chateau d'Yquem, golden as sunlight trapped in glass. Blackwell raised his glass immediately. "To absent friends," he declared, "and present enemies. He drank deeply. Poirot's hand paused over his own glass. The wine's bouquet was perfect, honey, apricot, a whisper of toast, but beneath it, something else. A ghost of bitterness, gone almost before it registered. He set the glass down untouched. Diana sipped, then coughed. "It's sharper than I expected." "Sharpened by anticipation, my dear," Mrs. Crane said, draining half her glass in one swallow. "Nothing like a death threat to give the palate edge." Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the chatter. "We will speak of the matter after the fish. Until then, civility." The sole arrived, poached in vermouth, with a sauce of cream and tarragon. Conversation limped along familiar paths. The unreliability of servants, the scandal of the Prince of Wales's latest amour, the impossibility of finding decent grouse since the war. Poirot listened, his small ears attuned to the silences between words. Captain Vale leaned toward him. "You're unusually quiet, Poirot. Cat got your grey cells?" "On the contrary, mon capitaine. They are purring like a well-tuned engine. Tell me, when you served on the Erebus, did you ever encounter cyanide in the officers' mess?" Vale's fork paused. "Cyanide? Good Lord, no! Though there was a midshipman who tried to poison the cook with arsenic. Wanted shore leave, got keel-hauling instead." "Keel-hauling is no longer fashionable," Poirot murmured. "But poison, it seems, never goes out of style." The main course was announced with a flourish. Saddle of lamb, pink and glistening, surrounded by rosemary potatoes and baby carrots glazed in honey. The chef, a Frenchman who had survived the trenches by feeding generals, had outdone himself. Even Blackwell paused in his demolition of the claret to grunt approval. It was during the carving that the first real crack appeared. Thomas, the young footman, approached Blackwell with the sauceboat. His hand trembled. A drop of the rich red wine reduction splashed onto the pristine tablecloth, spreading like blood. "Steady, boy," Blackwell growled. "You'll ruin the linen." Sorry, sir." Thomas's face was the colour of the lamb. "It's just, cook said to be careful with the sauce. Said it was special." A hush fell. Every eye turned to the sauceboat. Lady Eleanor's voice was ice. "Special how, Thomas?" The boy swallowed. He put something in it, m'lady. A powder, from a little bottle. Said it was to bring out the flavour." Poirot was on his feet before the words were out. "Do not serve it," he snapped. "Jarvis, take the boat to the sideboard. No one touches the lamb." Blackwell stared at his plate, where a generous pool of sauce already glistened. "You're saying—" "I'm saying nothing yet. But prudence, Sir Reginald, is the better part of valour, and of survival." Mrs. Crane pushed her plate away with theatrical disgust. "I've lost my appetite. Though I must say the drama does wonders for the digestion." Diana's hands flew to her throat. "Aunt Eleanor, I feel strange. My tongue, it's tingling." Poirot was beside her in an instant, tilting her chin with gentle fingers. Her pupils were normal, her breath steady, but a faint flush stained her cheeks. "You drank only the wine?" "And a sip of the consommé, that's all." He turned to Miss Grey, who had touched neither food nor drink. "Mademoiselle, you are wise. Or perhaps you knew what was coming." Miss Grey's eyes widened. "I swear Later!" Poirot's attention was on Blackwell, who had risen unsteadily. The industrialist's face was slick with sweat, his breathing laboured. "Reggie!" Mrs. Crane's voice held genuine alarm. "Sit down, you fool!" Blackwell clutched the table edge. Damn it, I feel—" His glass tipped, spilling the dequem in a golden arc. He stared at it as if it were the Thames. "The wine! It tasted—" He never finished. His knees buckled, and he crashed forward, his bulk sending silverware flying. The orchid Epergon toppled, grapes rolling across the cloth like tiny green skulls. Chaos erupted. Diana screamed. Mrs. Crane swore with creative fluency. Captain Vale vaulted the table to reach Blackwell's side, his naval training taking over. "Pulse is racing," he barked. "He's burning up. Poirot, what the devil?" "Prussic acid," Poirot said grimly. "Hydrocyanic. The almond smell. Classic. But the dose, not enough to kill instantly. Someone wants him to suffer." Lady Eleanor stood frozen, her face a mask. "The sauce? Possibly. But the wine?" Poirot snatched Blackwell's glass, sniffing delicately. "Yes, here too. Diluted, but present." Jarvis, the butler, had appeared as if conjured. "Doctor, sir! The village, too late for that." Poirot was already loosening Blackwell's tie. "We need ammonia, smelling salts, anything to stimulate respiration. And the chef, bring him, now." Thomas, the footman, had gone the colour of curdled milk. "Cook, he's gone, sir. Left not 10 minutes ago. Said he had a headache." Vale's head snapped up. "Gone? In the middle of service?" "His coat's missing," Jarvis confirmed, "and the back door was unlatched." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then we have our first rat leaving the ship. But the poison was placed before he fled. Someone in this room knew." Blackwell groaned, a sound like a dying bull. His eyes, bloodshot and rolling, fixed on Poirot. "Eleanor, the will, she—" His head fell back, and for a moment Poirot thought he was gone. Then the massive chest heaved, and he gasped, a single word escaping, "Vault!" Lady Eleanor swayed. Miss Grey caught her arm, steadying her with surprising strength. "The vault!" Vale repeated. "What vault?" But Blackwell had lapsed into unconsciousness, his breathing shallow and rapid. Poirot stood, wiping his hands on a napkin. "We must move him to the library. The fire there is strong, and the sofa is long enough. Jarvis, send for Dr. Hawthorne regardless, and have Mrs. Danvers prepare coffee. Strong, black, no sugar. We will need clear heads." As the footman lifted Blackwell's inert form, Poirot turned to the table. The sauceboat sat innocently on the sideboard, its contents cooling. He lifted the lid, inhaling. No almonds here, just the rich scent of reduced wine and herbs. "The sauce is clean," he announced. "The poison was in the wine, but not all the glasses. Observe." He moved along the table, sniffing each glass in turn. "Diana's clean, Mrs. Crane's clean, Vale's clean, Miss Grey's untouched, Lady Eleanor's clean. Only Blackwell's bore the telltale trace. Someone knew which glass was his," Poirot said softly. "Someone who watched the pouring." Diana's voice was a thread. "Thomas poured. He serves from the right always. Sir Reginald's glass was directly in front of him." Thomas, who had been hovering near the door, made a strangled sound. "I didn't, I swear." "We shall see," Poirot said. "But first, the chef. Jarvis, the village constable. Have him intercept any vehicle leaving the estate. And the dogs. Release them in the kitchen garden." As the room emptied, Poirot lingered, his gaze on the spilled wine soaking into the tablecloth. The stain spread, dark and accusing. He dipped a finger, tasting cautiously. The bitterness was unmistakable. From the corridor came the sound of running feet, shouted orders, the frantic barking of dogs. Poirot straightened, his small figure suddenly immense in the empty room. "The toast of deception," he murmured, "but whose hand raised the glass? And why spare the others?" He moved to the Epergne, writing it with care. One orchid had fallen, its stem broken. He picked it up, twirling it between his fingers. The petals were the exact shade of dried blood. 3 days until the new moon, he said to the silent room. And already the first blow is struck, but not, I think, the last. Outside, the wind had risen, rattling the windows like impatient fists. Somewhere in the distance, a dog bayed, long and mournful. And in the library, Sir Reginald Blackwell fought for each breath, his secrets locked behind clenched teeth. Poirot slipped the broken orchid into his pocket beside the vial of nightshade. 2 poisons, 2 messages, 1 truth. The game, he reflected, had moved from the drawing-room to the deathbed, and Hercule Poirot intended to be there when the final card was played. Chapter 4. The Fatal Sip. The library had become an improvised sick-room, its dignity offended by the smell of carbolic and the harsh glare of a green-shaded desk lamp dragged from the study. Sir Reginald Blackwell lay on the leather Chesterfield like a beached whale, his dinner jacket cut away, his shirt open to reveal a chest matted with grey hair, and now slick with sweat. Dr. Hawthorne, summoned from the village at a gallop, knelt beside him, stethoscope pressed to the labouring heart. "Pulse 130 thready," the doctor muttered. "Pupils pinpoint. Classic cyanide. But the dose? Odd. Should have killed him outright." He glanced up at Poirot, who stood at the foot of the sofa like a small, immaculate general. "You're certain it was the wine?" "Certain, docteur. The almond odour, the cherry-red flush, textbook. Yet the quantity was calculated to maim, not murder. Someone wishes Sir Reginald to linger." Blackwell's eyes fluttered open. They were bloodshot, rolling, but a spark of consciousness remained. His thick fingers clawed at Poirot's sleeve. "Vault!" The word was a rasp. "Eleanor! She knows." Lady Eleanor, seated in a high-backed chair near the fire, went very still. Her face was the colour of old parchment, but her voice did not waver. "Reginald, you are delirious." He shook his head, a terrible effort. "Not delirious. The will changed it after Henry died." Dr. Hawthorne administered a hypodermic, sodium thiosulfate, the new antidote from America. Blackwell's breathing eased fractionally, but his colour remained alarming. Poirot leaned close. "Sir Reginald, listen to me. You said vault. Where is this vault?" Blackwell's lips moved soundlessly. Poirot bent lower, ear almost touching the man's mouth. "Cellar, behind the 95 Margot, false panel." A convulsion seized him then, arching his spine. Foam, pink-tinged, appeared at the corner of his mouth. Dr. Hawthorne swore and reached for the oxygen cylinder Jarvis had fetched from the stables. Poirot straightened, his face grim. He will live, perhaps, but not to speak again tonight. Lady Ashford, the cellar now. She rose every inch the chatelaine despite the tremor in her hands. "Jarvis, the keys." The butler produced a heavy ring from his pocket, selecting a long iron key blackened with age. "This way, my lady." The party moved like a funeral procession. Lady Eleanor, Poirot, Captain Vale, Mrs. Crane, who had insisted on coming, clutching a brandy balloon like a talisman, and Miss Grey, silent as a shadow. Diana had been sent to her room with a sedative. Thomas the footman was under guard in the pantry, weeping. The cellar stairs descended in a spiral of stone, worn hollow by centuries of feet. The air grew colder, damp with the breath of the earth. Rows of bins marched into darkness, bottles cobwebbed and silent. Jarvis lifted a lantern. The flame guttered, throwing grotesque shadows across the vaults. "Margot 95, Lady Eleanor said. 3rd bin on the left." They found it easily. A dozen bottles nestled in straw, their labels faded but legible. Poirot ran his fingers along the wooden divider at the back. It moved under pressure, revealing a recessed panel. The iron key fit perfectly. A click, and the panel swung inward on concealed hinges. Beyond lay a small chamber, no larger than a confessional. A single bulb, operated by a pull cord, revealed a steel safe embedded in the wall. Its dial gleamed dully. "Combination?" Poirot asked. Lady Eleanor hesitated. "My husband's birthday. 140372. Vale spun the dial with practiced efficiency. The safe opened with a soft sigh. Inside, ledgers bound in red leather, a velvet jewel case, and a thick envelope sealed with black wax. Poirot took the envelope. The seal bore the same entwined E&A as his, invitation. Inside was a single sheet, cream stock, copperplate hand. The vault is opened, the sins are counted. 1 life for 1 betrayal. The new moon waits. Beneath the message, a list. Henry Ashford, 1918, Charles Crane, 1922, Reginald Blackwell, 1925. The year 1925 was underlined in red. Mrs. Crane's brandy sloshed over the rim of her glass. Charles, my husband. He died of heart failure in Biarritz. Or so the certificate said, Vale murmured. Convenient, that. Lady Eleanor's voice was barely audible. Henry, my first husband, was shot in a hunting accident. The gun cleaned itself, they said, and Charles... She looked at Mrs. Crane with something like pity. You were in Monte Carlo when he died. Poirot's eyes narrowed. 3 deaths, 3 husbands, 3 years ending in betrayal, perhaps. And now Sir Reginald, who would have been the 4th if the poison had been stronger. He turned the page over. On the back, a crude map of the manor, with the cellar marked in red. An arrow pointed to the safe, and beneath it, a single word, justice. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Inspector Japp, arriving with 2 constables and the village sergeant. His bowler hat was askew, his moustache bristling with indignation and cold. Poirot! Got your telephone message. Attempted murder, eh? And the chef vanished into thin air. Dogs lost the scent at the river. He surveyed the vault, the safe, the envelope. What the devil have you stumbled into? A reckoning, mon ami. 20 years in the making. Japp took the envelope, sniffing it suspiciously. Anonymous letters, poison secret vaults. Reminds me of the Crumbles case, only posher. Where's the victim? Library. Dr. Hawthorne has him stabilized, but he may not regain speech for hours, if ever. They returned upstairs. Blackwell had been moved to a guest room. The library was now a crime scene. Constables dusted for fingerprints. A photographer recorded the overturned epergne, the stained tablecloth, the single glass with its telltale residue. Poirot stood at the window, watching dawn bleed across the sky. The yews looked blacker than ever, their branches like skeletal fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled 6. Japp joined him. The wine, was it tampered with in the cellar? Non, the bottles were sealed. The poison was added after decanting during service. Only 3 people had access. Jarvis, Thomas, and the chef, who has fled. Thomas is a nervous wreck. Swears he poured straight from the decanter. Jarvis confirms the seals were intact when he brought the wine up. Then the poison was in the decanter itself. Or, Poirot's eyes gleamed. In Sir Reginald's glass alone, a sleight of hand during the toast. Mrs. Crane, who had been listening from the doorway, gave a bark of laughter. Reggie's glass was crystal, same as the rest. How do you poison one glass without the others? Noticing. With a powder that dissolves instantly, Poirot said. Or a coated rim, applied earlier. The footman pours. The guest drinks. The evidence vanishes with the wine. Captain Vale entered, carrying a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Found this in the pantry, behind the flower bins. Thought you'd want to see it before the constables trample it. He unwrapped a glass vial, identical to the one from Lady Eleanor's travelling case, but empty. A trace of white powder clung to the bottom. Thomas says the chef asked him to fetch special salt from the village chemist yesterday, Vale continued. Boy thought nothing of it. Cook was always experimenting. Poirot took the vial, holding it to the light. Potassium cyanide. Enough for a dozen murders, and the chemist will have a record, yes? Already telephoned, Japp said. Sold to a man in a dark coat, face hidden by a scarf. Paid cash. Lady Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face composed, but her eyes haunted. Monsieur Poirot, a word. She led him to the morning room, closing the door firmly. Sunlight streamed through the windows, revealing dust motes dancing like tiny ghosts. "Reginald spoke of the will," she said without preamble. "He was right. I changed it last month. The manor goes to the National Trust, the London house to Diana, unchanged. But the residue—" She drew a breath. "To a charity for war orphans. Reginald believed it should come to him. He and Henry had an arrangement, debts forgiven in exchange for shares in the Rhodesian mines. When Henry died, Reginald claimed I reneged." "And did you?" "I honoured the debts, but the mines were worthless. Reginald lost everything. He has been pressing me ever since." Poirot's gaze was steady. "And the others? Captain Vale served with your brother. Mrs. Crane's husband died conveniently. Miss Grey. Felicity has been with me 15 years. She knew Henry's secrets, and Charles's, and perhaps mine." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of a bracket clock. "You believe the killer is one of us," Lady Eleanor said finally. "I believe the killer is someone who knows every corridor of this house, every secret of its occupants. Someone who has waited years for this moment." She moved to the window, staring out at the gardens where the first roses were opening despite the cold. "Then find them, Monsieur Poirot, before the new moon rises, and the next name is crossed off that list." He bowed. "I shall, Lady Ashford. But first, I must speak with the chef, if he can be found, and with Sir Reginald, if he wakes, and with every soul in this house who ever poured a glass of wine." As he turned to leave, she caught his arm. "There is one more thing. In the safe, another envelope, addressed to you." Poirot's eyebrows rose. She handed it over, heavy cream stock, his name in the familiar copper plate. He broke the seal. "The first act is done. The second begins at dusk. Trust no one and who smiles at breakfast." At the bottom, a postscript in red ink. "Ask Miss Grey about the Tangier letters." Poirot folded the note carefully. "It seems our correspondent grows bold, or desperate," Lady Eleanor said. He slipped the note into his pocket beside the orchid and the empty vial. "Desperation, Lady Ashford, is the mother of mistakes. And Hercule Poirot is very fond of mistakes." Outside, the sun climbed higher, gilding the manor's crumbling stone. Inside, the house held its breath, waiting for dusk. Chapter 5. Poirot's initial observations. The morning room had been commandeered as an interrogation chamber. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, striping the Persian rug with bars of gold that looked, to Poirot's fastidious eye, suspiciously like prison stripes. He had arranged 2 chairs facing each other across a small mahogany table. On it lay his notebook, a silver propelling pencil, and the 2 vials, one full of nightshade, one empty of cyanide, placed side by side like exhibits in a museum of malice. Inspector Japp hovered by the door, arms folded, bowler hat now resting on the mantel beside a porcelain shepherdess, who appeared to disapprove of the entire proceedings. Dr. Hawthorne had pronounced Sir Reginald stable, but comatose. The industrialist lay upstairs under police guard, his breathing stertorous, his secrets locked behind swollen lips. Poirot adjusted his tie, charcoal silk, the knot a perfect dimple, and addressed the room at large. "We begin with the household, yes? One by one. No interruptions, no alibis offered until asked. The truth, mes amis, is a shy creature. It must be coaxed." Jarvis entered first. Summoned by a footman, who looked as though he expected to be next on the poisoner's list. The butler's face was the colour of old parchment, but his back was straight as a ramrod. "Sit, mon vieux." Poirot indicated the chair. 32 years in this house. You have seen births, deaths, marriages, bankruptcies. Tell me, what did you see yesterday between 3 and 5 o'clock? Jarvis folded his hands with ecclesiastical precision. "As I informed you, sir, I was in the pantry polishing the George II candelabra. Alone." "Alone," Poirot repeated softly. "Yet the pantry window overlooks the kitchen garden. Did you see the chef leave?" "No, sir. The yew hedge blocks the view. Convenient. And the decanter, the Chateau d'Yquem. When did you bring it from the cellar?" 7:15, sir. I decanted it myself at 7:30, sealed the neck with wax and placed it on the dumbwaiter to the dining room. Thomas took it up at 7:50. Poirot's pencil scratched. "You tasted it?" "Naturally, sir." A sip from the decanter before sealing. It was perfect. No bitterness. None. Poirot leaned forward. "And the glasses. Sir Reginald's glass. Specifically, who prepared the table?" "Mrs. Danvers and the maids, sir. I inspected at 6:30. All was in order. Yet someone tampered with one glass. Or with the decanter after it left your hands. You are certain the seal was intact when Thomas collected it?" Jarvis hesitated, a fraction, but Poirot caught it. "I believe so, sir, though Thomas was agitated, kept dropping things." "Send him in." Thomas entered trembling, his cowlick more defiant than ever. Tears had left salt tracks on his cheeks. "I didn't do it, sir. I swear on my mother's grave." Poirot's voice was gentle. "No one accuses you, yet. Tell me exactly what happened when you took the decanter." Thomas gulped. "Jarvis gave it me on the dumbwaiter. Wax seal was whole, red wax with the crest. I carried it careful-like to the sideboard, set it down next to the glasses. Then cook." He shouted for more parsley, so I went back to the kitchen. Couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. 2 minutes, Poirot mused. Enough for a sleight of hand. Who was in the dining room? "No one, sir. The family was dressing. Mrs. Danvers was upstairs with her ladyship's gown." Poirot dismissed him with a nod and summoned Mrs. Danvers. The housekeeper was a battleship in bombazine, her keys jangling like sabres. "I've run this house for 25 years, she declared. "No one enters the dining room without my say-so." "Yet someone did," Poirot countered, "between 7:50 and 8 o'clock. You were with Lady Ashford?" "Helping with the pearls, yes. Miss Grey was there too, fetching the diamond brooch from the safe." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Miss Grey was in her ladyship's dressing-room? Mrs. Danvers sniffed. "For 2 minutes, no more. Then she went to her own room, said she had a headache." The interviews continued. The maids, terrified, useless. The gardener, drunk since dawn. The scullery boy, asleep in the coal-hole. None had seen the chef after 7:30, when he had been observed arguing with a dark-coated gentleman at the kitchen door. At 10 o'clock, Poirot requested the guests. Captain Vale arrived first, lighting a cigarette with naval nonchalance. "Fire away, Poirot. Though I warn you, my alibi's watertight. I was in the billiard room with Reggie from 7 until the gong. He was losing spectacularly and blaming the table." Poirot smiled thinly. "And after the gong?" "Straight to the dining room. Jarvis can confirm." "He does, but tell me, your scar. Gallipoli?" Vale touched it unconsciously. "Shrapnel. Nasty business. Why?" "Because scars are stories, mon capitaine, and stories have sequels. You knew Henry Ashford well." "Best friend I ever had. Died in my arms, poor devil. Eleanor never forgave the War Office, or me, for surviving." Poirot made a note. "And the Tangier letters?" Vale's cigarette paused. "What letters?" "The ones Miss Grey is urged to reveal. by our anonymous friend. Vale exhaled slowly. Ancient history. Henry wrote to a woman in Tangier, married woman. Eleanor found out after he died, burned the letters, or so she said. Yet someone kept copies, perhaps. Vale's eyes were suddenly cold. If they did, they're playing with fire. Mrs. Crane swept in next, smelling of violet water and vengeance. She refused the chair, preferring to pace like a caged panther. "Ask your questions, little man. I've nothing to hide except my age and my bank balance." Poirot bowed. "Madame, your husband Charles, his death in Biarritz. Heart failure?" "Doctors said so. I was in Monte Carlo, losing at baccarat. Convenient for the gossip mongers. And the insurance? Double indemnity, paid promptly. Charles was insured up to his eyebrows, literally." She touched her own plucked arches. "But if you're suggesting I poisoned Reggie to protect my dividends, think again. He owed me £30,000. Poirot's pencil flew. A debt he could not pay. Not unless the Rhodesian mines struck diamonds, which they didn't. Diana Ashford entered like a sleepwalker, her eyes swollen, her navy dress creased. She sank into the chair as if her bones had dissolved. "I can't bear it," she whispered. "First Uncle Henry, then Mr. Crane, now Sir Reginald. Who hates us so much?" Poirot's voice softened. "That is what we discover, mademoiselle. Tell me about the Italian count." She flushed crimson. "A mistake. Aunt paid his debts to be rid of him. I was foolish. Ungrateful? Desperately. But I'd never—" Her voice broke. "I was in my room all evening until dinner. Miss Grey brought me aspirin at 7:45. You can ask her." "I shall." Miss Grey was last. She entered with the leather folder clutched like a shield, her plain face composed, but her eyes haunted. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "you are the keeper of secrets. The Tangier letters, what do you know of them?" She went very still. "Lady Ashford burned them. I was there. Yet copies exist. Our poisoner says so." Miss Grey's knuckles whitened. "Then someone lied, or stole them before the fire. You were in her ladyship's dressing-room at 7:30, then to your own room. Yet Mrs. Danvers says you were gone longer than 2 minutes. I walked in the gallery. I needed air." "Air," Poirot repeated, "or opportunity. The dining-room lies beneath the gallery. A clever person could descend the servant's stair, tamper with a glass, return unseen." Miss Grey met his gaze steadily. "I am not clever, Monsieur Poirot, only loyal. Loyalty," he said, "can be a mask for many things." He dismissed her, then turned to Japp. "The chef, any sign? Constable found his bicycle by the river. Tracks lead into the water. Either he swam for it, or he's fish food. Poirot's." Moustaches twitched. "He swam. A desperate man, but not suicidal. He knows too much." Japp scratched his head. "So the poisoner's one of the guests or staff?" "Both are possible. But observe, the nightshade in Lady Ashford's case. Placed after unpacking, yes? Only someone with access to her room. The cyanide in the decanter, placed after decanting, before service. Only someone in the dining room or pantry. The letters, the vault, the list of deaths, only someone intimate with the family's history." He stood pocketing the vials. "We search the house, every room, every drawer, every mousehole, and we watch Sir Reginald. If he wakes, he may name his killer." The search began at noon. Constables swarmed like bluebottles, under beds, behind tapestries, inside chimneys. In Miss Grey's room, they found a locked dispatch case. She opened it reluctantly. Inside, copies of the Tangier letters, annotated in red ink. Poirot read one aloud. "My darling, if Eleanor knew, she would kill us both. But I cannot live without you. Meet me in Biarritz, August 1922. Signed H.A. Mrs. Crane's eyes narrowed. Henry and Charles's wife, the one who drowned in the hotel pool. Apparently not drowned, Poirot said. Poisoned, perhaps, like Charles, like Henry. In the chef's abandoned room, they found a false bottom in a trunk, a notebook in French, recipes interspersed with dates and initials. H.A., Strychnine, 1918, C.C., Digitalis, 1922, R.B., Cyanide, 19-25. Jap whistled. Our chef's a professional, but why? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Revenge or justice? The question is, for whom? At 3 o'clock, a scream echoed from the west wing. A maid had found Diana Ashford unconscious in the bathroom, an empty pill bottle beside her. Veronal. Dr. Hawthorne was summoned again. Overdose, he pronounced, but not fatal. She'll wake in a few hours, sick as a dog. Poirot stood over the girl's bed, his face grim. On the nightstand lay a note in the familiar copper plate. The second act. Some debts are paid by the children. He turned to Lady Ashford, who had gone white as bone. Your niece tried to escape the nightmare. Someone ensured she would not. The house seemed to contract around them, walls pressing closer, shadows deepening though the sun still shone. Somewhere, a clock struck 4. Poirot gathered the household in the hall. His voice rang out, clear and terrible. Mesdames et messieurs, the killer grows bold. 2 attempts in 24 hours. But boldness breeds carelessness. Tonight, we set a trap. Sir Reginald's room will be guarded, but the guard will be me. The killer will come to finish what was begun, and Hercule Poirot will be waiting. He did not add that he had already baited the trap. A forged note slipped under Blackwell's door, promising consciousness at midnight and a name. The sun sank behind the yews, painting the sky blood red. In the sick room, Poirot sat motionless, the green-shaded lamp casting his shadow huge against the wall. At his feet, the vials glinted like malevolent eyes. Midnight approached. The house held its breath. And in the darkness beyond the door, a floorboard creaked. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Servants' Quarters. The servants' hall at Elmwood Manor lay beneath the main house, like a buried heart, its low ceiling blackened by centuries of coal smoke, its air thick with the ghosts of mutton fat and boiled cabbage. At 2 in the morning, it should have been asleep. Instead, it hummed with the muted panic of a hive disturbed by smoke. A single gas jet hissed above the deal table, throwing a sickly light over the faces gathered there. Hercule Poirot had chosen this hour deliberately. The guests were drugged with exhaustion and fear. The constables dozed in the library. Even Inspector Japp had been persuaded to take a turn on the sofa with a hot water bottle and a promise of coffee at dawn. Only the servants remained, those who kept the manor's pulse beating, and Poirot intended to listen to that pulse now. He entered without ceremony, his small figure incongruous among the deal dressers and chipped enamel basins. Mrs. Danvers rose like a ship coming about, her keys clinking ominously. Monsieur Poirot, this is highly irregular. Order, madame, is my profession. Tonight, irregularity is the order. He placed a chair at the head of the table and sat, arranging his cuffs. You will all remain until I say otherwise. Jarvis, the door. The butler closed it with the soft finality of a coffin lid. The scullery maid, Elsie, 14 and freckled, began to cry silently. Poirot opened his notebook. We begin with the chef, Monsieur Lefebvre. How long in your employ? Mrs. Danvers answered for the room. 6 months, came with excellent papers from the Duke of Westminster's London house. Yet he fled like a thief at the first whiff of cyanide. Curious. Poirot's pencil tapped. Who hired him? Miss Grey, Jarvis said reluctantly. She handles all correspondence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And who recommended him?" A pause. Then Thomas the footman spoke up, his voice cracking. "A letter, sir, from a lady in Paris. Said he was the best sorcier since Escoffier." "Show me." Jarvis produced a folded sheet from his pocket, creamstock, copperplate hand. Poirot read aloud. "Lefebvre is discreet, skilled, and harbours no love for the English aristocracy. He will serve your purposes admirably." Signed only with an initial V. Mrs. Danvers sniffed. "I thought it odd, but Miss Grey said her ladyship approved." Poirot folded the letter carefully. "And Lefebvre's quarters? Searched?" "Top to bottom," Japp had reported earlier. But Poirot trusted no search but his own. "We will look again, but first, Thomas." The boy flinched. "Sir, you served the wine. You left the decanter unattended for 2 minutes. Who could have entered the dining room in that time?" Thomas swallowed. "Anyone, sir. The baize door to the pantry was open. I heard footsteps, but thought it was cook." "Footsteps," Poirot repeated. "Soft or heavy?" "Soft, like a woman's." The maids exchanged glances. Elsie's sobs grew louder. Poirot turned to her. "You, Petite, you cleaned the guest rooms. Yesterday, between 3 and 5. What did you see?" Elsie wiped her nose on her apron. "Nothing, sir. Only Miss Grey's room. She'd locked it. Said she had a headache." "Locked?" Poirot murmured. "Yet you have a master key." Mrs. Danvers bristled. "My girls don't pry." But someone did. Poirot stood abruptly. "Come, we examine the chef's room now." They trooped upstairs to the attic floor, a warren of sloping ceilings and mouse droppings. Lefebvre's room was at the end, its door sealed with police tape that Poirot ignored. Inside, the search had been thorough. Mattress gutted, floorboards pried, even the chimney swept. Nothing. Poirot knelt by the hearth, running his fingers along the bricks. One moved under pressure. He pressed harder. A small panel slid aside, revealing a cavity. From it, he drew a tin box. Biscuit tin, the label faded but legible. Huntley and Palmer's 1914. Inside, a passport in the name of Jean Valois, a French infantry badge, and a photograph. A young couple on a Paris street, the woman dark and beautiful. The man in uniform, scarred, smiling, unmistakably Captain Marcus Vale. Poirot's breath caught. "Mon Dieu!" Mrs. Danvers peered over his shoulder. "That's not Lefebvre." "No," Poirot said softly. "It is Vale, 20 years younger, and the woman looks like her ladyship's sister," Jarvis supplied. "Miss Victoria. Ran off to France in 15. Died in the influenza, they said." Poirot turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, "For my brother Jean. If anything happens to me, make them pay. V." The room seemed to tilt. Poirot steadied himself against the bedpost. "Lefebvre is Vale's brother-in-law," he said. "Victoria Ashford's husband. He came here not to cook, but to kill." Downstairs a bell rang. Sharp, insistent, the sick room. Poirot ran, the others clattering behind. Sir Reginald's door stood ajar. Inside, Dr. Hawthorne bent over the bed, his face grim. "He's awake," the doctor said, "and talking, but not for long." Blackwell's eyes were open, fixed on Poirot with desperate clarity. His lips moved. "Volt! Not all. Henry's bastard." Poirot leaned close. "Whose bastard, mon ami?" Blackwell's hand clutched Poirot's wrist with surprising strength. "Diana! Not Henry's, Victoria's, mine!" The effort cost him. He slumped back, chest heaving. Dr. Hawthorne reached for the oxygen. Poirot straightened, his mind racing. "Diana, Blackwell's daughter, not Henry Ashford's, the inheritance, the will, the murders, all to protect a lie." Footsteps in the corridor. Captain Vale appeared, dishevelled, a Webley revolver in his hand. "Poirot! Jap's gone. Message about the chef at the river. I came to check." His eyes fell on the photograph in Poirot's hand. Recognition flashed, then something darker. "You shouldn't have found that." Poirot's voice was calm. "You sent your brother-in-law to do your killing, mon capitaine." But he grew impatient. The cyanide was meant for Blackwell tonight, finishing the job. Vale's scar twitched. Victoria died because of them. Henry seduced her, married her off to a Frenchman to hide the shame. Blackwell paid to keep it quiet. When she died, they buried the truth with her. And you waited 20 years. Jean needed work. I needed justice. Vale's hand tightened on the revolver. "Step aside, Poirot. Blackwell dies tonight. Then the rest." Mrs. Danvers gave a small, choked sound. Jarvis moved to block the door. Poirot raised a hand. "You mistake me, Capitaine. I do not prevent justice. I ensure it is complete." He reached into his pocket, drawing out the forged note he had planted earlier. "You came because of this, yes?" Promising Blackwell would name his killer at midnight. Vale's eyes narrowed. "You tricked me. I trapped you. There is a difference." Poirot's voice hardened. "But tell me, Diana, did you know she was Blackwell's?" Vale hesitated. Jean found the birth register in Paris. Victoria named the father on her deathbed. We thought to spare the girl. "Spare her?" Poirot's laugh was bitter. "You would orphan her with poison. Drop the weapon, Capitaine. The game is over." For a moment, Vale wavered. Then, with a snarl, he lunged, not at Poirot, but at the bed. Dr. Hawthorne moved to intercept. The revolver roared. The doctor fell, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Jarvis tackled Vale from behind. Thomas piled on. The revolver skittered across the floor. Poirot retrieved it calmly. "Enough," he said. "Captain Marcus Vale, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Sir Reginald Blackwell and for conspiracy in the deaths of Henry Ashford and Charles Crane." Vale struggled in Jarvis's grip, his face contorted. "They deserved it, all of them." "Perhaps," Poirot said quietly, "but justice is not yours to dispense with cyanide and lies." Sir Reginald's eyes fluttered closed. His breathing steadied into the slow rhythm of drugged sleep. Dr. Hawthorne, pale but conscious, allowed Mrs. Danvers to bind his wound with a torn sheet. Poirot turned to the servants. "You will say nothing of this until Inspector Japp returns. The chef, Jean Valois, must still be found. He is the hand, Vale, the mind. Both must answer." Dawn was breaking as Poirot descended to the kitchen. The range still held warmth. A pot of coffee simmered, forgotten. He poured a cup, black and strong, and stood at the big window watching the sky pale over the yews. 2 attempts foiled, 3 deaths avenged, but at what cost? Diana would wake to learn her father lived, but her mother had been erased from history. Lady Eleanor would face the ruin of her family's name. And somewhere, Jean Valois, grief-stricken, desperate, still ran. Poirot sipped his coffee. It tasted of chicory and betrayal. "The servants' quarters," he murmured, "hold more secrets than the salons. But the greatest secret of all is this: revenge is a dish that poisons the cook." He set the cup down, untouched after the first sip. Outside, the first bird sang, a thin, defiant note against the coming day. The new moon was 2 nights away. And Hercule Poirot knew the final act was yet to play. Chapter 7. The Locked Study Interrogation. The study at Elmwood Manor had been locked since the night of the dinner. Its heavy oak door sealed by Inspector Japp with red tape and the solemnity of a man who trusted no one, least of all the aristocracy. At 9 o'clock on the morning after Captain Vale's arrest, Poirot had the seal broken. The room smelled of dust, old tobacco, and the faint metallic tang of fear that had seeped into the walls. A single table had been placed in the centre, flanked by 2 straight-backed chairs. On it lay Poirot's notebook, the 2 vials, the forged midnight note, and the biscuit tin with its damning photograph. A constable stood outside the door. Japp leaned against the mantel, nursing a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Poirot entered first, his grey suit immaculate, his moustaches waxed to lethal points. He arranged the items with geometrical precision, then addressed the empty room. We begin with the innocent, or those who believe themselves so. Lady Eleanor was brought in first. She had aged a decade overnight. Her black silk was replaced by morning grey, her pearls by a single jet brooch. She sat without being asked, her hands folded like a penitent's. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, "you have unmasked a monster, but there are more. I feel it. Monsters, Lady Ashford, are rarely solitary. They breed in the dark." He pushed the photograph across the table. "Victoria Ashford, your sister. You told us she died of influenza." Lady Eleanor's lips thinned. "A convenient lie. She died in childbirth in a Paris clinic. The child, Diana, was smuggled back to England. Henry claimed her as his own to avoid scandal." "And Reginald Blackwell?" "The father. He paid for the clinic, the silence, the forged papers. Henry hated him for it, but needed his money." Her voice cracked. "I hated them both." Poirot's pencil scratched. "Yet you raised Diana as your niece." "She was all I had left of Victoria." Lady Eleanor's eyes filled, but no tears fell. "When I changed the will, I thought to protect her. The manor to charity, the London house to her, free of Reginald's claws. You knew of the Tangier. Letters? I burned them. Felicity witnessed it." Poirot nodded. "Yet copies existed. Miss Grey kept them." Lady Eleanor's composure fractured. "Felicity? We shall see." Poirot dismissed her with a bow. Miss Felicity Grey entered next, the leather folder absent for the first time. Her plain face was blotched with sleeplessness, but her eyes were steady. "You lied, mademoiselle," Poirot said without preamble, "about the letters, about the parcel that vanished, about your headache that required a walk in the gallery." Miss Grey sat, folding her hands. "I kept the letters for insurance. Henry Ashford was not kind to Victoria. When she died, he laughed, said one less mouth to feed. I was her companion then. I swore I'd see him pay." And Charles Crane, Victoria's lover after Henry tired of her. He abandoned her when she was pregnant. I sent him digitalis in a box of chocolates. He died in Biarritz, thinking it was his heart. Poirot's voice was soft. "And Henry? Strychnine in his hunting flask. The accident was convenient. I cleaned the gun myself." She spoke calmly, as if reciting a shopping list. Japp's mug hit the floor with a clatter. "You?" he spluttered. "A secretary." Miss Grey's smile was thin. "Secretaries see everything, Inspector, and are seen by no one." Poirot pushed the empty cyanide vial toward her. "And Sir Reginald? I prepared the wine. Thomas left the decanter for exactly 1 minute, 43 seconds. I timed it. A drop of solution on the rim of the glass. Enough to sicken, not kill. I wanted him to suffer as Victoria suffered. But Captain Vale believed he masterminded it. I encouraged his hatred, the letters to the chef, the anonymous notes, all mine. Vale thought he was avenging his sister-in-law. I let him." Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. "And Diana," Miss Grey's composure cracked. "She was innocent. The veronal. I swapped the pills for harmless lactose. I wanted her to sleep through the nightmare, not die in it." "Why confess now?" Because you would have found the typewriter ribbon in my room. The copper plate is mine. I practiced for years, and because—" Her voice broke. Victoria deserved better than revenge served cold by a bitter spinster. Poirot studied her for a long moment. "You poisoned 3 men, attempted a 4th, yet you spared the child." "Victoria's child," Miss Grey corrected. "The only good thing to come from that cesspool of lies." Japp recovered his voice. "Felicity Grey, I'm arresting you for the murders of Henry Ashford, Charles Crane, and the attempted murder of Reginald Blackwell." Poirot raised a hand. "One moment, mon ami. There is a detail." He opened the biscuit tin, removing the French infantry badge. This belonged to Jean Valois, Lefebvre. He believed Diana was Henry's daughter. If he learns the truth— Miss Grey went white. "He'll kill her. He swore it. Said the Ashford line must end." Poirot stood. "Then we have work to do. Constable, fetch Captain Vale from the cellar, and send word to the river patrol. Valois must be found before dusk." As Miss Grey was led away, her wrists in cuffs, Poirot lingered over the table. He picked up the forged midnight note, his own handiwork, and tore it into precise quarters. "Confession," he murmured, "is the poison that cures the soul. But some poisons have no antidote." Diana Ashford was next, brought down under guard. She had been told nothing. Her eyes were wide, bewildered. Aunt Eleanor said Miss Grey, but she was always so kind. Poirot's voice was gentle. "Kindness, mademoiselle, can wear many masks. Sit." He told her everything. Victoria's flight to Paris, Blackwell's paternity, the forged birth certificate, the murders. Diana listened in silence, her face draining of colour. "I'm not an Ashford. You are Victoria's daughter, and Reginald Blackwell's. The manor, the money, none of it matters. You are alive. That is what your mother would have wanted." Diana began to cry, not the theatrical sobs of before, but the quiet tears of a child learning the world is built on lies. Mrs. Crane entered last, unescorted. She had heard the commotion and demanded her turn. "Well, little man," she said, lighting a cigarette with steady fingers. "The mouse poisons the cats. Who'd have thought?" "You, madame, suspected?" "I knew Charles was no angel. But digitalis in the chocolates, that's style." She exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "And Reggie? Serves him right. He owed me 30,000 and a lifetime of bad jokes." "You profited from his death?" "From his survival, actually. He signed over shares in the Argentine Railway before the cyanide hit. Worthless, but the gesture was touching." She stubbed out the cigarette. "Will I hang?" Poirot smiled faintly. "You are a witness, madame, not a suspect, though your testimony about the chocolates may shorten Miss Grey's drop." Mrs. Crane laughed. A rich, throaty sound. "I always said secretaries were dangerous. Give the woman a medal and a quiet cell." She left, humming a waltz from her Monte Carlo days. Japp scratched his head. "So it's over. Grey confesses, Vale's locked up, Blackwell lives. Non, mon ami. It is not over. Jean Valois is still free. And he believes Diana must die to end the Ashford line. We have until dusk." Poirot moved to the window. The sky had turned the colour of bruised pewter. Rain lashed the panes like thrown gravel. "Lock the house," he ordered. "Every door, every window. Diana to the attic with 2 constables. Lady Ashford to the library with Mrs. Crane. She is surprisingly handy with a poker. You and I, Japp, will take the cellars. Valois knows them better than we do." Japp checked his revolver. "And if he's already inside?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then we give him what he wants. A confrontation, but on my terms." He opened a drawer and removed a small bottle. Colourless liquid, unlabelled. Nightshade. The dose Miss Grey prepared for Lady Ashford. Enough to fell an ox. Japp stared. You're not? I am Poirot. I do not poison, I bait. He slipped the bottle into his pocket. Come, the final act begins. They descended to the cellars, lanterns swinging. The air was colder now, the shadows deeper. Somewhere, water dripped with the regularity of a metronome. Poirot paused at the wine bins. Valois will come for the vault. It is where the story began. He arranged himself in the small chamber, the nightshade bottle on the safe stile. Japp concealed himself behind the Margot bins, revolver ready, minutes stretched into an hour. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate. A figure appeared in the doorway. Soaked greatcoat, chef's whites beneath, a scarred face twisted with grief and madness. Jean Valois. He saw the bottle and laughed, a terrible sound. For the girl, or for me? For you, mon frère, Poirot said quietly. If you choose. Valois raised a pistol. Where is she? Safe, as Victoria should have been. The chef's hand trembled. They killed her, all of them. They are dead, or in chains. Let it end. Valois' eyes filled. It ends when the last Ashford breathes. He lunged for the bottle. Japp moved to intercept, but Poirot was faster. He caught Valois' wrist, twisting with surprising strength. The pistol clattered to the stone floor. Enough! Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. You avenge your sister by murdering her child. Victoria would spit on you. Valois collapsed, sobbing. Japp cuffed him efficiently. As they led him upstairs, Poirot paused at the vault. He uncorked the nightshade and poured it onto the stone, watching it disappear between the cracks. Some poisons, he said, are best left to the earth. Above, the rain had stopped. A weak sun broke through the clouds, gilding the manor's wet stone. Diana stood on the steps, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but composed. Poirot bowed to her. Mademoiselle, the nightmare ends. You are free to begin a new story. She managed a tremulous smile. With what name? With whichever you choose. The past is ash. The future is yours. Behind them, the police van crunched down the gravel drive, carrying Vale and Valois to justice. Miss Grey would follow in the morning. Sir Reginald, awake and lucid, had signed a confession absolving Diana of any claim on his tainted fortune. Poirot watched the van disappear, then turned to Japp. Another case closed, mon ami. Japp offered a cigarette. Fancy a pint. The village pub does a decent pork pie. Poirot considered, then smiled. Why not? Even the grey cells deserve a holiday. As they walked down the drive, the yews seemed less menacing in the sunlight. Somewhere, a blackbird sang. The new moon would rise tonight, but for the first time in 20 years, Elmwood Manor would greet it in peace. Chapter 8. Clues from the poison vial. The village constabulary's back room had been pressed into service as a makeshift laboratory. A scarred deal table bore the weight of Poirot's portable chemistry case, glass tubes, spirit lamp, litmus papers, and a microscope borrowed from Dr. Hawthorne's surgery. Rain had returned in the night, drumming on the slate roof like impatient fingers, but inside the air was thick with the sharp bite of reagents and the quieter menace of truth. Inspector Japp stood at the window, watching the square where a knot of villagers pretended to buy sprouts, while stealing glances at the police station. Whole counties talking, he grumbled. Poison at the manor. Secretary turns out to be Lucrezia Borgia in a cardigan. Chef's a frog assassin. And the captain, well, least he won't be court-martialed twice. Poirot did not look up from the microscope. Gossip, mon ami, is the manure in which rumours grow. We deal in facts. He adjusted the focus, his small hands steady as a watchmaker's. On the slide, a crystalline residue scraped from the rim of Sir Reginald's wineglass. "Potassium cyanide," he announced, "but impure. Traces of ferrocyanide, industrial grade, not the pure salt a chemist would buy." Japp turned. "Meaning?" "Meaning our Miss Grey did not purchase it from an apothecary. She distilled it herself, or had it from a factory." Poirot straightened, wiping the lens with silk. "Blackwell's Mills in Sheffield. Do they use cyanide in extraction?" "Gold plating," Japp confirmed. "Barrels of the stuff. But the seals were intact when the wine left the cellar." "Seals can be forged." Poirot moved to the table where the 2 vials lay like sleeping adders. The nightshade, still full, its liquid the colour of weak tea. The cyanide, empty, but its cork stained with a faint blue ring. He uncorked the cyanide vial, inhaling delicately. "Almonds, yes, but beneath, petroleum, a solvent. Someone cleaned this vial with paraffin before filling it." Japp scratched his chin. "Kitchen paraffin? Or the gardener's shed? We search both." Poirot produced a third object, a small glass funnel, found in Miss Grey's dispatch case. "Observe the residue inside, identical crystals. She prepared the solution here, then transferred it to the vial." A knock. Constable Buse entered, dripping, clutching a sodden bundle wrapped in oilskin. "Found this in the River Reed, sir. Weighted with stones, but the current tore it loose." Poirot unwrapped it carefully. A chef's apron, blood-stained, and a notebook bound in black oilcloth. The pages were swollen but legible, written in French, the same spidery hand as the anonymous notes. Japp whistled. "Valois' confession." "More," Poirot said, turning pages. "A diary. Listen." He read aloud, translating. 15th of November. E believes the child is H. Jids. She must die with the rest. I argued V would not want this, but E is stone. The line ends. She says, I will do it tonight, then vanish to Calais. E. Japp frowned. Eleanor. Non. Eleanor was in the library with Mrs. Crane, and Miss Grey signed her notes with F. Poirot flipped to the final entry, dated yesterday. The Belgian suspects. I saw him in the cellar with the lantern. If he finds the funnel, all is lost. I will silence the girl at dawn, then burn this. Forgive me, Victoria. Poirot closed the book. Valois intended to kill Diana this morning, but someone stopped him. Miss Grey swapped the veronal, Japp recalled, kept the girl asleep. Yet Valois wrote this after the veronal incident. Someone else intervened. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Someone who knew Valois' plan and countered it without revealing themselves. He returned to the vials, holding the nightshade to the light. This interests me more. Belladonna atropine, distilled from berries. Potent, but slow. Miss Grey intended it for Lady Ashford. Death in sleep, blamed on grief. Yet the berries do not grow wild here until July. Japp snapped his fingers. The hothouse. Gardner grows exotic plants for the table decorations. Exactly. Poirot donned kid gloves and opened the nightshade vial, pouring a drop onto a watch glass. He added a reagent. Deep purple bloomed, then faded to amber. Fresh, distilled within the week. The hothouse log will show who entered. They repaired to the manor, the rain now a steady hiss against the gravel. The hothouse was a jungle of steam and green shadows, its glass panes fogged. The gardener, Mr. Hodge, a gnome in a flat cap, met them at the door, twisting his cap in gnarled hands. Berries, sir. Aye, her ladyship likes 'em for the table arrangements. Deadly mind, but pretty. I picked a handful Tuesday for the Epergne. Poirot examined the log. Entries in Hodge's crabbed hand, and one in elegant copperplate. F. Grey, 12 Nov, 3 berries for drying. Yet the orchids in the Epergne were fresh, Poirot murmured. Someone substituted. In the corner a small still, copper tubing, a Bunsen burner, hidden behind sacks of bone meal. Poirot lifted a beaker. A sticky residue coated the bottom. Atropine, he confirmed. Miss Grey distilled here, then planted the vial in Lady Ashford's case to deflect suspicion. Japp bagged the still. But why nightshade if she had cyanide? Insurance. Cyanide for Blackwell. Quick, public. Nightshade for Eleanor. Quiet, deniable. She played both ends. Back at the station, Poirot arranged the clues like a hand of patience. The funnel, the diary, the hothouse log, the impure cyanide, the paraffin trace. He stepped back, head tilted. Observe the pattern. Every clue points to Miss Grey, too neatly. The funnel, in her drawer, the log in her hand, the diary condemning Valois but sparing her. Someone wants us to believe she acted alone. Japp frowned. You think there's another? I think Miss Grey is the hand, but not the mind. Someone fed her the cyanide, the berries, the plan. Someone who knew the manor's secrets better than she. A memory stirred. Sir Reginald's rasping words. Vault, not all. Henry's bastard. And the list in the vault. H.A., C.C., R.B., but no E.A., no Eleanor. Poirot's eyes gleamed. We return to the vault. There is a second compartment. They did, with Lady Ashford's key. The safe's back panel, missed in the chaos, swung open at Poirot's touch. Inside, a single ledger, bound in green leather, and a locket. The ledger's pages were filled with payments to F.G., 50 Talon monthly, 1918-1925. The locket held a miniature of Victoria Ashford, and on the back, engraved, to my true daughter, E. Lady Ashford went white. That locket was buried with Victoria. Yet here it is. Poirot opened the ledger's final page. An entry in copperplate. F.G. has served her purpose. The child will inherit nothing. The manor burns at the new moon. E. Japp stared. Eleanor. But she's the victim. No, she is the architect. Poirot's voice was soft steel. She discovered Diana was Blackwell's, not Henry's. The will change was not to protect the girl. It was to disinherit her. The poison, the notes, Valois, all puppets. Miss Grey believed she acted for Victoria. Eleanor used her to destroy the men who ruined her sister, then planned to sacrifice her scapegoat. Lady Ashford swayed. You cannot prove. I can. Poirot produced a sheet from his pocket. Typewriter ribbon from Miss Grey's room. Its impressions matching the anonymous notes. But the paraffin trace? From your still room, where you distill lavender water. The hothouse key on your chatelaine opens the still's lock, and the ledger, your handwriting beneath the disguise. He turned to Japp. Arrest Lady Ashford for conspiracy to murder. The new moon was to be her triumph. The manor in flames, Diana blamed. The Ashford line ended in scandal. Lady Ashford lunged for the nightshade vial, but Japp was faster. She collapsed sobbing as the cuffs clicked shut. Poirot watched impassively. You loved your sister, madame, but love twisted into hate is the deadliest poison of all. Outside, the rain had stopped. A watery sun broke through, gilding the manor's windows. Poirot stepped into the light, breathing deep. Clues from the poison vial, he murmured. They always tell the truth, if one knows how to listen. Japp joined him, lighting a cigarette. Another triumph, Poirot, though I'll miss the old girl's scorns. Poirot smiled faintly. Justice, mon ami, is a bitter tea, but it cleanses the soul. They walked toward the village, the ledger and locket secured in Poirot's case. Behind them, Elmwood Manor stood silent, its secrets finally dragged into the light. The new moon would rise tonight, but for the first time it would illuminate a house at peace, with its ghosts, if not its living. Chapter 9. The Twist of the Will. The drawing-room at Elmwood Manor had been stripped of its grandeur. Dust sheets shrouded the furniture like winding cloths. The chandelier, unlit, hung like a frozen waterfall. Only the long table remained, cleared of silver and orchids now bearing a single object, a mahogany box containing the last will and testament of Henry Ashford, deceased these 7 years. Around it stood the survivors, scarred, diminished, but alive. Mr. Archibald Thorne, senior partner of Thorne, Willis and Sons, adjusted his pince-nez and cleared his throat with the gravity of a man about to pronounce sentence. He was a thin, desiccated gentleman who smelled of vellum and righteous indignation. Before we proceed, he began, I must inform the assembled parties that certain irregularities have come to light. Lady Ashford, he inclined his head toward Eleanor, who sat flanked by 2 constables, her wrists in discreet cuffs, has been charged with conspiracy. However, the will we open today is Mr. Henry Ashford's, executed in 1917 and witnessed by myself and the late Mr. Willis. Its validity is unaffected by subsequent events. Sir Reginald Blackwell occupied a wheelchair, his bulk diminished by illness, and the knowledge that his empire was crumbling. A blanket covered his knees, his eyes still sharp, fixed on the box with predatory hunger. Captain Vale, manacled but permitted to attend under guard, stood at the window, staring at the yews as if they might offer escape. Miss Grey, pale but composed, sat beside Diana Ashford, who clutched a handkerchief as though it were a lifeline. Poirot stood apart near the fireplace, his small figure the only still point in the room. He had insisted on the reading. The will, he said, was the final piece of the puzzle. Thorne broke the seal. The wax cracked like a gunshot. He unfolded the heavy parchment, its black lettering stark against the cream. I, Henry Edward Ashford, being of sound mind. The lawyer's voice droned through the preliminaries, debts, funeral expenses, bequests to servants. Poirot listened with half an ear, his attention on the faces around him. To my wife, Eleanor Victoria Ashford, née Langtry, I leave the manor house at Elmwood, its contents, and the sum of £10,000 per annum for her natural life. Lady Eleanor's lips curved in a bitter smile. £10,000, once a fortune, now a pittance against the debts she had engineered to ruin the estate. Upon her death, or in the event of her remarriage, the manor to pass to the National Trust for the preservation of historic houses. Blackwell shifted in his chair. Get on with it, man. Thorne's pince-nez flashed. To my niece, Diana Victoria Ashford, I leave the London house in Belgrave Square, its contents, and the residue of my estate, estimated at £120,000. Diana gasped. Miss Grey's hand tightened on hers. Provided, Thorne continued, his voice gaining strength, that she attain the age of 25 unmarried, or marry with the approval of my trustees. Should she fail in either condition, the residue to be divided equally between my cousin, Mrs. Lydia Crane, and my business associate, Sir Reginald Blackwell. A collective intake of breath. Mrs. Crane, who had been examining her nails with theatrical boredom, sat up straighter. Blackwell's knuckles whitened on the arms of his wheelchair. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, the twist. Thorne cleared his throat again. There is a codicil, dated 14th of March, 1918, witnessed by Dr. Hawthorne's predecessor and the then vicar of St. Mary's. He turned the page. Should it be proven that my niece Diana is not my daughter, but the child of another, this bequest is revoked. The London house to be sold proceeds to the War Orphans Fund. The residue to Sir Reginald Blackwell in recognition of moneys advanced. The room erupted. Diana's cry was drowned by Blackwell's roar of triumph and Mrs. Crane's sharp laugh. "Silence!" Japp barked from the doorway. Thorne waited for quiet. "There is one final clause. In the event of any attempt to contest this codicil by violence, fraud, or coercion, the entire residue to pass to the aforementioned War Orphans Fund, and the perpetrator to be barred from any benefit." Lady Eleanor's laugh was low and terrible. Henry's last joke. He knew. He always knew. Poirot stepped forward. "Knew what, madam?" "That Diana was Reginald's. That I would try to protect her. That Reginald would try to claim her. He built the trap himself, years before any of us thought to spring it." Blackwell's face was purple. "Then the money's mine. The girl's 22, 3 years to wait, and she's penniless unless she marries with approval." "My approval?" Diana stood, trembling. "I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man on earth." Mrs. Crane lit a cigarette with deliberate calm. "And I, Reggie dear, get nothing unless the girl disobeys, which she will. Stalemate." Thorne closed the will with a snap. "The codicil requires proof of paternity. Sir Reginald, do you possess such proof?" Blackwell hesitated. "Victoria's letters burned," Lady Eleanor said flatly, "by my own hand." Poirot produced the locket from his pocket, the one from the vault. "But not all evidence was destroyed. This locket, engraved to my true daughter, E for Eleanor, but also for evidence. Inside, a lock of hair. Diana's baby hair, yes?" Diana touched her own blonde curls, bewildered. "Compared with Sir Reginald's," Poirot continued, "under the microscope at the constabulary, the match is conclusive. Science, mes amis, is more reliable than scandal." Blackwell slumped. "Then the residue passes to the War Orphans," Poirot finished, "because you, Sir Reginald, attempted murder to secure it. The clause is triggered. Mrs. Crane receives nothing. Lady Ashford's annuity continues until her trial, and likely imprisonment. The manor to the trust, the London house to be sold." He turned to Diana. "You, mademoiselle, receive only what your mother would have wished, your life, your freedom, and the truth." Diana's tears fell silently. Miss Grey put an arm around her shoulders. Thorne gathered his papers. "The estate will be administered by the court. Sir Reginald, you are bankrupt. Your creditors will take what remains. Mrs. Crane, your brother's debts exceed his assets. Lady Ashford, the annuity will barely cover your legal fees." Mrs. Crane exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "Well played, Henry. You always did hate to lose." Blackwell stared at his hands. "I built an empire, and poisoned it with greed," Poirot said quietly. "The will was Henry Ashford's final revenge, on all of you." Lady Eleanor met Poirot's gaze. "And Victoria. Victoria's revenge was Miss Grey's. But even she was a pawn. Henry suspected the affair, suspected the child, suspected the hatred. He wrote the codicil the day he returned from France, knowing he might not survive the war, but determined his fortune would not reward betrayal." He moved to the window. The yews were shedding their needles in the wind, a slow green rain. "Observe," he said to the room at large, "the twist of the will was not in the bequests, but in the conditions. Henry Ashford turned greed against itself. The more desperately you clutched, the more certainly you lost." Japp entered with constables. "Time to go, ladies and gents. Trials to prepare, cells to assign." As they were led away, Lady Eleanor erect, Miss Grey weeping silently, Vale staring at nothing. Blackwell wheeled like a broken king. Diana lingered. "Monsieur Poirot, what do I do now?" He took her hand. "You live, mademoiselle. You choose a name that is yours alone. You study, perhaps, medicine to heal what poison cannot. You honor your mother by being better than the world that broke her. she managed a tremulous smile. "Will you visit? Perhaps, when the orchids bloom again." Outside, the police van waited. Mrs. Crane paused on the steps, lighting one last cigarette. "Tell me, Poirot," she called, "was it worth it? All the death, for a charity?" Poirot considered. "Worth is measured in lives saved, madame. The war took a generation. Henry Ashford's money will educate another. That is worth more than empires built on lies." She flicked the cigarette into the gravel. "You're a sentimental little man, Poirot. And you, madame, are a survivor. Use it, wisely." The van doors closed. The engine coughed to life. As it crunched down the drive, Poirot stood alone on the steps, the wind tugging at his coat. Jap joined him, offering a flask. "Brandy, medicinal?" Poirot took a sip, then handed it back. "The case is closed, mon ami. But the story, the story continues. In orphanages, in courtrooms, in the choices of a young woman who now knows her worth is not in pounds, but in possibilities." Jap capped the flask. "Fancy a lift to the station. Train to town in an hour." Poirot glanced back at the manor, its windows blind, its chimneys cold. Yes, London calls, and somewhere a new mystery awaits. They walked down the drive together, two small figures against the vast indifference of the sky. Behind them, Elmwood Manor settled into silence, its secrets buried at last beneath the weight of a dead man's cleverness. The new moon rose, thin and silver, over a house finally at peace. Chapter 10. The Denouement at Dawn. The great hall of Elmwood Manor had never looked more like a courtroom than it did in the pale light of the new moon's aftermath. Dawn was still an hour away, yet every lamp blazed, every candle guttered in its sconce, and the long oak table, once reserved for banquets and betrayals, now served as a stage for final reckonings. The National Trust had already sent surveyors. By noon, the house would be measured, catalogued and stripped of its ghosts. But before the bureaucrats arrived, Hercule Poirot demanded one last gathering. He stood at the head of the table, immaculate in charcoal grey, his small hands resting on the mahogany box that had held Henry Ashford's will. Around him, the survivors arranged themselves like pieces on a chessboard after the king has fallen. Diana Ashford, pale but composed in a simple wool dress. Mrs. Lydia Crane, cigarette unlit for once, her diamonds pawned to pay counsel. Sir Reginald Blackwell, wheeled in by a stony-faced nurse, his empire reduced to the blanket across his knees. Lady Eleanor Ashford, wrists free but flanked by constables, her black silk replaced by prison grey. Captain Marcus Vale and Jean Valois, the false Lefebvre, shackled together, their faces mirrors of defeated rage, and Miss Felicity Grey, the secretary whose quiet efficiency had masked a decade of calculated vengeance, seated between two warders, her eyes fixed on the table as if it might still offer escape. Inspector Japp hovered by the door, bowler in hand, his moustache bristling with the satisfaction of a case wrapped tighter than a Christmas parcel. Dr. Hawthorne lingered in the shadows, his arm in a sling, ready to testify or faint as required. Poirot's voice, when it came, was soft but carried to every corner of the vaulted hall. "Mesdames et messieurs, we meet at dawn, because dawn is the hour of truth. The new moon has risen and set without blood. The manor stands, the innocent breathe. But before we part, some to freedom, some to cells, some to the grave of reputation, I will reconstruct the crime, step by step, so that no shadow of doubt remains." He began with a gesture toward the empty Pergnier, now a museum piece in the corner. "The dinner. 8 places, 8 glasses, 1 poisoned. But the poison was not in the wine, it was on the glass. A rim coated with cyanide solution, applied between 7:50 and 8 o'clock while Thomas fetched parsley. Miss Grey, you timed the boy's absence to the second. You descended the servant's stair, entered the dining room, and painted death with a camel hair brush. The solution dried invisible. Sir Reginald drank, the rest were spared. Miss Grey did not look up. I have confessed. Oui, but confession is not explanation. Why, Sir Reginald? Because he was the father of Diana, the living proof of Victoria's ruin. You believed eliminating him would end the Ashford line's corruption. Blackwell stirred. I never wanted the girl dead. Non, Poirot interrupted. You wanted her married. To you, or to a man of your choosing, so that the residue of Henry's estate, triggered by the codicil, would flow into your bankrupt coffers. You advanced the moneys in 1917 knowing Henry suspected the truth. You blackmailed him into the codicil. When he died, you waited. When Eleanor changed her will to protect Diana, you panicked. You hired Vale. Vale surged against his chains. Lies! I acted for Victoria! Poirot's eyes were green ice. You acted for pride. You discovered Jean Valois, your brother-in-law, in a Paris café, drowning in grief and absinthe. You fed him stories of Ashford cruelty. You sent him here as chef, with letters in copperplate you dictated. You planted the nightshade in Eleanor's case to implicate her. You wrote the anonymous notes, Elmwood will drink blood, to terrorize the household into chaos. But Miss Grey, he turned to the secretary, you saw through the captain's amateur theatrics. You intercepted his letters, rewrote them in your own hand, and turned his revenge into your own. Miss Grey's voice was a whisper. He was sloppy. Victoria deserved precision. Lady Eleanor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. And I, Monsieur Poirot? Where do I fit in your pretty tableau? Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. You, madame, are the architect of despair. You discovered Diana's paternity in 1918, the day Henry returned from France with the codicil. You burned Victoria's letters but kept the locket. You paid Miss Grey £50 a month for 15 years, not for loyalty, but for silence. When the debts mounted, when the manor crumbled, you saw a way out. Let the past destroy itself. You encouraged Miss Grey's hatred. You gave Vale the cellar key. You changed your will to disinherit Diana, knowing it would drive Blackwell to desperation. You planned the fire for the new moon. Blame the secretary. Claim insurance. Vanish to the continent with what remained. He produced the green ledger from the vault. Your handwriting, madame, beneath the disguise, the payments, the final entry. The child will inherit nothing. You used them all, Grey, Vale, Valois, even your own niece, as kindling for your pyre. Diana's voice trembled. You would have let me burn. Lady Eleanor met her gaze. I would have given you a new life. In Argentina, with the insurance money, you would never have known the truth. Lies, Diana said quietly. All of it, lies. Poirot raised a hand. But lies have consequences. Observe. He moved to the table's centre, where a single object now lay. The broken orchid from the Epergne, its stem still bearing a trace of crimson sap. This orchid was the signal, planted by Valois on Vale's orders to mark the poisoned glass. But Miss Grey substituted it with a fresh bloom. Her way of warning Diana, unconsciously. The girl noticed the colour change, hesitated, drank only the consommé. The cyanide on Blackwell's glass acted alone. He turned to Valois. You, mon chef, were the blunt instrument. You distilled the nightshade in the hothouse, believing it for Eleanor. You weighted your apron with the diary and sank it in the river, your confession, your suicide note, but the current betrayed you. Valois hung his head. Victoria, Victoria, Poirot echoed, would weep to see what her memory birthed. 3 deaths, 4 attempts, a fortune scattered to orphans, and for what? A moment's passion in 1917, a lie sustained for 20 years. He stepped back, surveying the wreckage. The reconstruction is complete. Henry Ashford's codicil, triggered by Blackwell's greed, Eleanor's despair, Grey's vengeance, Vale's pride, ensured that no one profited. The manor to the trust, the London house sold, the residue to children who will never know the Ashfords' shame. Diana, he bowed to the girl, you walk away with nothing but your name, and everything. Dawn crept through the windows, gilding the dust sheets in rose and gold. Outside, the yews stood sentinel, their shadows retreating. Japp cleared his throat. Time to go, Poirot. The vans are waiting. Poirot nodded. One by one, the prisoners were led away. Lady Eleanor erect, Miss Grey weeping, Vale and Valois shuffling in shared defeat, Blackwell wheeled like a discarded monarch. Mrs. Crane paused at the door, lighting her cigarette at last. You know, little man, she said, exhaling toward the ceiling, Henry would have enjoyed this. The bastard always did love a twist. She followed the others into the morning light. Diana lingered, alone with Poirot among the shrouded furniture. What now? She asked. Now, he said, you choose. A typist in London, a nurse in France, a gardener in Kew. The world is wide and you are young. She managed to smile, the first genuine one Poirot had seen. Will you write? Perhaps a postcard? From Brussels? My sister has a confectionery that makes the finest pralines. He offered his arm. Together they walked through the great hall, past the empty épergne, past the table where death had been served and justice portioned out. The front doors stood open. Beyond, the gravel drive glittered with dew. At the threshold, Poirot paused. One last thing, mademoiselle. The orchid, it blooms again in spring. Plant one where the yews cast no shadow. Let it be your monument to Victoria. Not vengeance, but beauty. Diana nodded, tears bright in her eyes. Goodbye, Monsieur Poirot. Au revoir, ma petite. The game is never truly over. Only the board changes. He watched her walk down the steps, her slight figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Then he turned to Japp, who waited with the police car. Home, mon ami. To London, to order, to the next puzzle. Japp opened the door. Fancy a kipper's breakfast at my club. My treat. Poirot considered, then smiled. Why not? Even the grey cells must eat. The car crunched away down the drive, past the yews that no longer seemed to whisper. Behind them, Elmwood Manor stood empty, its windows blind, its chimneys cold. The National Trust would come with clipboards and catalogues. The orphans would receive their cheques. The prisoners would face their trials. But in the garden, where the orchard met the wilderness, a single orchid seed, carried on the wind from the broken stem, lodged in fertile soil. By spring, it would bloom, defiant and purple, in a patch of sunlight the yews could not reach. And somewhere, in a quiet flat off the Strand, Hercule Poirot would read of it in a letter from a young woman who had chosen the name Victoria Grey, and smile into his morning coffee. The denouement was complete. The curtain fell, but the story, like the manor's stubborn roses, would bloom again.